So that was the reason.
I never did it again. But I used to really enjoy that church there. The church right there was out their back door. It was about as far as from here out to that wall out there, close. Nobody had screens in those days, hardly.
Yes.
And had the windows wide open, and man, the music they made in there would really set you off.
Do you remember any of the songs they sang, or?
They sang all popular hymns, and
not showers of blessings, though.
No, they sang the old rugged cross. I remember that one.
Yeah, probably so.
And I can hear this thing, on Christ the solid rock.
Oh
I
yeah,
stand.
yep.
All other ground is sinking sand.
Right.
Yeah, I learned some of the words.
Sure you did. Yeah.
I want to know about this again. You said, what was it? I can't think of their name.
Who?
Wilhelmina, and what was her name?
Wilhelmina and Alma.
Alma, yeah.
Alma was the same age as me.
Yeah, okay, was she painting, what was she painting, did you say?
Huh?
Was it Alma that was doing the painting, or the black?
No, it's a black girl, Carm.
All right, okay, that's what I'm asking you.
Alma never painted.
Okay, the black girl was painting.
Yeah.
And you were going to go where? With?
Huh?
You were just going someplace with her, you mean?
Well, she wanted to go to the other end of town. She didn't have any money.
Oh, okay, all right. I guess you had to have money to get on the streetcar too, you know.
They had a little black guy there that was a champion boxer, amateur boxer, and he was about the same size as me, and he was always after me to get into that organization with those, because he said I had long arms and I would really go big. I got in a fight with him, and Jesus Christ, he hit me every place, but I mean, I couldn't touch him, and he was so fast. And boy, his folks came over that night, and they made him apologize and everything. And of course, I told him it wasn't his fault; it was mine, and I started it, and that was a lie. But I was a friend to him the rest of the time that I ever went to Fort Wayne.
I bet you were.
Boy, they were really going to thrash him for. Oh, I was all beat up. I wouldn't give up. That's the trouble.
Yeah.
Wilhelmina, the daughter, Fanny's daughter, was killed in some kind of a car accident. But she was a lot of fun. I liked her. And Alma was nice too. And Alma has not been gone really very long. And then her husband died about a year later, and that's only a couple of years ago, really. I was writing to Virgil, you know, at the time.
And Fanny taught me to fish before I could walk.
Yeah, she was fun.
I'd go over to Fort Wayne and stay there because I was a favorite of my Uncle Earl. He had a son, a worthless son, who was named Dwayne. He didn't care for him at all. But he'd take me hunting and take me fishing and everything. And we'd load up a family and go to those lakes. There was just lakes every place around Fort Wayne, Indiana, and north. And I can remember this as plain as day. And it usually happened at every trip. For lunch, we'd be so hungry from fishing and swimming and everything, and we didn't know what to do. And Fanny would always come out with 2 peanut butter sandwiches for each one, you know. And I don't know why nobody ever caught on to it, but Uncle Earl always said, God, said a pot of beans and cornbread would sure go good about now. And Fanny, she'd laugh and go to the car, and that's what she come out with, a great big pot of beans and cornbread, you know.
She knew what they liked. Yeah, she was quite a lady. Yeah.
Now, Earl was your uncle, though.
Yeah,
How
look,
old?
He was your uncle. Earl was your uncle.
By marriage.
Oh, by marriage.
Fanny was
And I remember
his mother's
he was the best
Okay.
barber I've ever seen. He cut everybody's hair, but he had a real name at the barber business. But he quit the barber business because these old farmers would come in and they always had a bad breath, and he couldn't stand that, so he quit
God's
that
sake.
barber business and
then
took that job as streetcar conductor. And when the streetcar conductors quit during, or when they quit having it during the war, well, he took a job, but he was had a job with a big construction company, taking care of all their tools. But when he built the house, which as far as I know is still standing, the way he built it, he didn't have any money. Nobody had any money, and especially when he married to Fanny, Fanny spent it all. And this guy was tearing down a bunch of houses to build a factory or something, and he let Earl tear the houses down for the lumber, and he got all the best lumber there was, and all he wanted to, and he bought this lot in that black settlement. It had a big garage on it, and that's where we camped out for a long time, was in that garage. I remember he built an outhouse with 3 holes in it, and of course, he was a great jokester. He tried to get Fanny to sit on it there to see how big he should make that hole. You know, he's just kidding. She threw a glass of water on him. I'll never forget that. But what he did was had Alma and me taking nails out of the boards and pulling them, and they even saved the nails and used them in the house because they just didn't have any money for. Well, first thing Alma hit her thumb, and that was the end of that. She wouldn't do it anymore. But I guess I was born with a saw and a hammer in my hand, and I took the nails out of the boards that they built that house out of by myself, and I kept them busy too. But he complimented me so many times that I wouldn't have quit if I didn't have any fingers left. Well, I never hit my fingers right, but
I didn't realize they had built the house.
he thought that was great that
I didn't know that.
a 6, 7-year-old boy could pull nails.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
And that house, when
remember.
they left, was just as solid and straight as anything you ever saw. With the best lumber in the world in it. So,
Uh-huh.
the fact that it was secondhand, that didn't mean anything. It was all covered up. Nobody knew it was secondhand lumber.
When we first got,
Kind of like the old carpenter I worked with. He had a son that was just, well, Donnie Shume. John Shume had a son that was just a year younger than me. And he was good, too, as far as I'm concerned. But John, he'd always hire me to help him. And we saw the board that was too short, but it would have been hidden when we put some more boards on it, you know. And I told him, I said, well, don't tear it out, leave it on there. I said, nobody will ever know it's too short. You're going to put that other board on the top. He looked at me and he said, we will. Taught me a big lesson.
We will, yeah.
we will.
We'll know that it's too short.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
The other
we'll
thing-
know.
The other
Yeah.
thing, John taught me, well, 2 or 3 things. We were building he was actually a barn carpenter, but he could do house finish work if he wanted to. But we were working out on the farm, and there was a pond across the road from it, and they would people were holding a baptism there. And man, it was cold. I mean, it wasn't freezing or anything like that, but they dipped them there. They didn't just sprinkle on; they dipped them.
Right.
And so I said to John, I said, God, I said, oh, you look at those people. I said, it's a wonder they don't get pneumonia or something. He looked at me. He said, how many people do you know got sick after they was baptized? I shut my mouth.
I was going to tell you,
the other thing,
let me say something?
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was going to tell her.
We was out at this person's place and doing kitchen work, building some cabinets, and we got everything in the kitchen, and this woman had the radio on. John told her, he said, you'll have to turn that off because I can't hear anything that's going on, and it takes my mind off my work. She didn't do it. John started putting these tools in the handbags and so forth. She said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm going home. We didn't come to dance, we come to do carpenter work. The radio went off. Yeah.
I was going to tell him when we first came to
Huh?
when we first came to Ohio. I was going to tell him about how we took a train from. Let's see, did we have a bus or how did we get? I don't know how we started. Anyway, a train.
Well, we come from Chicago.
Through Chicago and to Fort Wayne, and that's where Aunt Fanny lived. So they were the ones that picked us up. In fact, Wilhelmina, the daughter, picked us up. And we go back to Fanny's. And Fanny says, or no, Wilhelmina says, well, we'll have supper there. We'll probably have to wash some dishes first, because after the meals, they piled the dishes up.
They never washed dishes.
Nobody washed dishes. And then when time to eat, you'd grab a dish, wash it off, and go to the stove and get your food and put it and sat down and ate. You know, that's how they did. So I guess that's how we did. But anyway, we were starting to wash dishes after we ate supper. And I was washing, and Wilhelmina is wiping the dishes. And I'm washing, and the whole pile of them there, they're stuck on. So I'm just, Wilhelmina says, well, hey, she said, just use this scratch pad, So anyway, that's how we finally got the dishes done. So then the next day, Fanny and Earl, they are the two that took us to Wilshire.
Oh, I see.
So that's the first, they were the first that I knew of the family. And took us down, we stayed at, Grandpa Fred's, his grandmother and grandfather's home. Grandma has gone, of course, and he's in the service. And so we lived with him until we got our house built then, in Wilshire.
So that was about how many, 67 years ago, or?
Well,
we
got married in 44, and Lynn was, she was how old?
She was born in 45, in 45 in May, and Ron got out of this, the war was over, in April, I think, of that year, that World War II ended.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron was still in California, was supposed to go to Norfolk, but when the war ended, he did get out then. So we came about Christmas, when Lynn was about from May till Christmas, 6 months or whatever she was then.
So it would have been in 45 then that you really moved
45
to Wilshire.
End of the year, 45, when we first
We
met there.
didn't plan on staying in Wilshire. I was going to go to school and join the forestry department.
Yeah, he was going to college. He could go to college and all. Those days you could get paid and everything to go to college. And I thought, too, that's what he should do. But
My buddy and me, we took a job in a bean mill about 10 miles away, and we always talked about owning our own business, and so the opportunity come up in Wilshire, and we went into the hardware business. It was the oldest business in town when it ended up.
Mm-hmm.
We had quite a thing there.
yeah, It was a big building that's
Had a-
uptown, and I don't know, the guy that owned it was going to let them have rent free if they cleaned it up. Wasn't that it?
Yeah.
Something like that. It was just a mess.
Oh, he give us a year's rent.
Well, he probably didn't. Yeah, probably just that. But
Probably ought to had 10 years.
they had to clean it all up and get
Well,
it
it
ready.
was a clothing store, and they got an interior fire, you know, and they put those high-powered hoses in there, and everything was up all over the walls, and we cleaned it up.
But the one thing that they had up there, I don't know who had it or what, but I'm down at Grandpa Fred's with a baby, and one day Ron comes. I guess we borrowed a car. We didn't have a car yet then, with a sewing machine, and he had painted it up at the store. He got it all painted white, and an old-fashioned one where you pedal at the bottom, you know, not electric. And I was just thrilled to death because I loved to sew, and I had been doing a lot of sewing clothes for Doreen and all kinds of things before I got married, and so here I had a sewing machine from that store.
The only trouble with starting a store in those days is you couldn't buy anything to sell.
Well, right after World War II.
We kept on the road all the time, and her, my partner's wife, would keep a store open, and we
would work it
what
out.
we did, we had took Wednesday afternoon off, didn't we?
Always. You had Wednesday afternoon off and
The rest of the
Saturday, I
time we
think.
stayed open until 11 o'clock at night, and
Yeah, they had different hours, you know.
and we sold everything. We sold everything from
Shoes.
wallpaper to shoes, and we had a public library in there.
Yeah. They'd get
And
books from the
they made
regular.
fun of us. They called us Spiegel May Stern. But the guy that made the most fun of us, he ended up with the store when we quit.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, you were more like a variety store.
Yeah.
But it was
pretty
sure a variety store. I tell you, they had everything. We had we had a Maytag franchise, and we also had a Perfection milker. Automatic milker machines came on the market then, and God, we just sold them, and you know, you sold all the pipe and everything with them, and it seemed that we got plenty of them. But the Maytag thing, we were number one on the list for sales in Indiana and Michigan and Ohio.
Really?
Well, what happened was we repaired old washing machines, you know, and everything else. And there was a guy from the way it was across the Mason-Dixon line in the United States. He come and bought all our used stuff, you know, and take it down across the. Of course, when things crossed the Mason-Dixon line, they were higher.
Oh.
And people don't remember that, but I sure do. Well, when we began to get Maytag washers, he thought he could make a deal out of that, which is what he did. We'd get the Maytag washers and load them right on his truck, and he'd take them across the Mason-Dixon line and sell them.
I see.
Strictly against the rules, you know.
Yeah.
But nobody knew it. So we were number one on sales, and not only Maytag washers, it was a Maytag stove and everything. We had a Maytag stove there at home, a gas stove.
I can't remember how it was.
Well, you can't.
A gas stove?
The best stove we ever had.
After we built the house, you mean?
Well,
Yeah.
man, we sure went to town on that.
So you sold gas stoves in those days, I
Oh, yeah.
suppose, huh? Not electric.
I don't ever remember selling an electric
Well,
stove. old George was.
Of course, the woman had a dress on, is what you're telling me, right?
Yeah, but nothing else.
Oh, yeah.
From where?
Huh?
What did you say?
I said nothing else.
Oh, good heavens.
She knew George.
Huh.
Bad stories, bad stories.
Did you know what you're getting into when you were called into Korea?
I didn't know it till we had I could have bought my partners out for nothing. One of them had died, and his sons was going to let me have his share for a steal, plus a parcel of 240 acres of land and a parcel of 75 acres of land. And we didn't have that kind of money. But I went to the Rockford banker who was always after me to go to work for him. I don't know what was the matter with him. And he had admired my military record, what it was. And I asked him about this deal, and he says, I asked him how much money I could borrow on it. He says, every cent, and said, if you don't want it, I do. So I came home with the check in my pocket. I called these two boys that was inherited that they were no good whatsoever. They were Italian kids that this guy had adopted as babies, you know, and they really took the old man down the pike. And I called him up and told him to come over, and we'd go to Van Wert, the county seat, and finalize the deal. At 1 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, I got a phone call to report to active duty in Fort Wayne that we'd been activated and was going on active duty. And that's when we started to go to Korea. So I had to let everything go, and it would have been a landfall, because they offered me that ground for $75 an acre. The last time I heard it sold for $3,500 an acre. God, and the lumber yard, they knew nothing about the lumber yard. They didn't know what was in there or anything like that. So they made a flat price on it, which was about 1/10 of what it was worth. And
so you really sacrificed for going to Korea.
Oh man, ask Carm, she knows.
Yeah, we could have been millionaires, but not. Maybe so.
The guy that
I write in my story right at the end of that chapter about Korea, about going into the lumber yard instead of Korea, that we could have been like Home Depot. No, is that what's the big place now?
Home Depot.
Huh?
Yeah, Home Depot.
I'm forgetting all kinds of things.
Well,
we could have been like, what's their name now? You know, the two guys that owned it, that started it.
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know?
Oh.
It's in my book. Can't remember. One of them.
the guy that
You know who they are.
bought the lumber yard then he did the same thing I was going to do, but he was an outsider, and he bought the lumber yard. First they hired him to evaluate it, you know, and he bought it. And he got the same deal that I would have got, and he had 80 acres next to Wren, Ohio, and the day after he bought it for $75 an acre, he sold it for $150 an acre. That's the second day he had it, and he was a damn fool. He could have really got a lot more than that if he'd just kept it. But I imagine he had to borrow the money to do it. See, too. So, but,
Well, I said
he hired me to. Well, they sold the lumber yard, and a chain outfit bought it. Kind of a chain outfit bought it, and they had an awful lot of debts, uncollected money, and they hired me to collect them. At that time, I worked in the building department for Montgomery Ward, and they gave me 10% of what I collected. The best job I ever had. I made 10 times what I made at Montgomery Ward every week, you know.
But they kept
There
raising
wasn't
it.
no way they could get out of paying that, you
But
know.
they were raising his quota too every
This
week.
big outfit bought it, and they couldn't afford to get a lawyer against them and so forth.
Uh-huh. Huh.